Hello, Enin, and welcome. My name is Niki Little, and thank you for joining me today in conversation with Sky Hopinka at the International Festival of Films on Art. For imagineNATIVE's Carte Blanche program, Indigenous Experimental Cinema, Artist Talk with Sky Hopinka. I just want to extend a warm thank you to the organizers at FIFA for connecting with imagineNATIVE for this opportunity to share the work of this really incredible artist. As I mentioned, my name is Niki Little, Wabshkimangan, and I'm a Nishininu from Kisgan-Wajing First Nation, which is in northern Manitoba. I'm the artistic director at imagineNATIVE, and imagineNATIVE is the world's largest presenter of Indigenous screen content. We are recognized locally, nationally, and internationally for excellence and innovation in programming and as a global center for Indigenous film and media arts. We are committed to a greater understanding of Indigenous peoples and cultures through the presentation of contemporary Indigenous media art, including film, video, audio, and digital interactive works. Our primary activity is our annual festival called the imagineNATIVE Film and Media Arts Festival, and this year it'll actually be running from October 19th to 24th, 2021. Submissions are open and are free, and open actually today, I believe, and run until the end of May. So if you're an Indigenous maker, please do check out our website. And year-round programming that we do are opportunities such as this, where we curate programs, connect with artists, do community screenings, and presentations of groundbreaking and legacy works worldwide to a worldwide audience. And finally, imagineNATIVE is Indigenous-led and artist-centered. We are a registered charity and committed to paying industry standard fees for all of our initiatives. And we're based out of Toronto, Canada. So please check out our website at imagineNATIVE.org. So that's enough about my spiel, and I just wanted to say hi to Sky and to welcome you today. Sky, just wanted to, I guess, give you a brief introduction and then have you introduce yourself a little bit further. And so when I think about your practice, a lot of things that come up for me are artist, observer, writer, educator, language carrier, and collaborator. Your work has been shown at many international festivals, including imagineNATIVE, Sundance, Wavelengths, Ann Arbor, etc. In addition, you've also been included in exhibitions with two most recent solo shows, Lore at Broadway, New York, and then Sky Hopinka, Centers of Somewhere at Bard College. Finally, in 2020, you're also the Guggenheim Fellow and also part of the Cousin Collective. So that's enough of me talking. So hi, Sky, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us again today. And I was just wondering if you could maybe give our audience a little bit more insight into yourself and how you locate yourself in your practice.
Sure. I mean, I don't know, I've been making films for about 9 years now, almost going on 10. And I don't know, like film has always been sorry, like the video just changed. So like now I see myself on the screen and it's like really disconcerting to talk into the screen like this. So I'm just going to remove the browser and just talk like this. So I feel like the films really became a way to express these different ideas I had around Indigenous presence in cinema, what Indigenous cinema could look like, and also a way to further explore different ideas around language and landscape. A lot of those questions I've had, I was asking early on, especially with language, in terms of what do I do with my own education around it, and how can I find different ways to explore language learning pedagogy that isn't traditional, that isn't traditional. I mean, like Western approaches in terms of like how I learned like Spanish in high school, or how I learned different ways of learning language that never really quite worked. So especially as the films have gotten, I guess, like a bit more exploratory and a little bit more propositional in terms of like what Indigenous cinema can look like and how does language exist in these different forms. I don't know, I think that's like where I find a lot of myself in the work, and that's how I ask myself a lot of questions about who I am.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate sort of the explorations, obviously, and as a viewer and as curator, as an artist as well, I really do see sort of those observations, and I appreciate how you ask your audience questions and you consider context, you consider power dynamics, as well as, you know, what are these structures and how has this lens been shown throughout the history and where is it now? And I was just wondering, through this artist talk specifically, you take us through 3 works. And I was just wondering if you could speak to the arc of that selection in relation to where you are now and sort of reflecting on these things and any patterns that you see or some conversations that you kind of see threads pulling out from those 3 works specifically.
Yeah, I mean, like, a lot of it is just, attempts to like locate oneself or to question what our relationship is to the landscape right now, or what mine is more specifically. And I mean, with these works, a lot of that, I mean, like, there's different ways to approach the land and the landscapes. And like, one is like through language in terms of how things are described, how places are described, and how that information is handed down.
Mm-hmm.
Other is like very physically moving through these different spaces. And I suppose the third is just like historically, looking at what these places offer in terms of being homelands, being places where we're from. There goes the word again. And it's all these different ways of trying to, I guess, like triangulate. Like I mentioned before. Like, I mean, there's a lot of different ways of trying to understand who we are. And like, for me, it's cinema, and it's more experimental forms of cinema that are challenging. And like, I mean, how can these be ways of asking questions further on?
And I was wondering, like, posing these questions, and I can imagine, like, as you as a person evolve, those questions might change, or the context might change, and time becomes either an impact, or I'm just curious about your notions of time, because I get a lot of sense, like, I've read some of Grace Dillon's work and writings, and she talks about this Anishinaabe idea of like returning to oneself, and we make this trip in time where we come back to ourselves, but we're actually moving forward at the same time. And I was just wondering if you could speak to time within your practice and how it shifts in relation to the work and also those explorations. That's a long question.
Well, I mean, it's like, I think that's one of the things I really enjoy about cinema. I mean, especially considering the way that stories are told or have been told, and how it's like a very performance-based process historically, and how like the written word codifies things in stones in a certain sense of permanence. And cinema does a similar sort of thing, but then the question is like how to account for these different ways of relating to time. Like, what is a Ho-Chunk-centric way of looking at time? What is a way of looking at time through the experiences that I've had in the communities that I've lived in and been a part of? And like nonlinear aspects or forms of storytelling, or even just like the collapsing of time or like the past and the present, or possibly the future, are ways to replicate that, or to utilize the medium, the cinematic medium, in such a way that can, I don't know, offer a different way of understanding and feeling these differences, where the past isn't just the past, it's still the present. And the materials that are often viewed as like archival or artifacts don't have to be viewed as such. And that's even like how I view certain recordings that I use in these films that are archival, or that are artifacts, or that were used as linguistic tools of research, but then how to remove them from that archive in ways that, I don't know, I think that are a bit more personal, or a bit more present.
And I guess, your voice carries through the talk, certainly, and kind of obviously, but it is really quite interesting right now, I guess, like being in this current state that we're in, how audio really grounds and really like kind of creates an immersive space that provides a texture that is hard to articulate. And I was just wondering if you could speak to like when that gesture that, inserting yourself in the narrative in such a personal way through your voice, and how, I guess like how that came to be, and then how you articulate that as you move forward, and sort of when to, sometimes we see your presence either through a hand, or either through changing the animations itself, or through your voice.
I guess the voice is for me, it's a lot more grounding in ways that suppose are akin to, I guess, the performative aspects of storytelling. I mean, even just looking at the cognitive load that, you know, these things take, especially with like Zoom or being on a computer screen and in a video chat. I was actually, just before this, I was reading this article that was talking about that, and just like where this fatigue comes from. And it comes from, you know, being constantly aware of like yourself. Like, this is a new format that I've never used before, but looking at the screen, I can see myself talking and I can't like minimize it. And it's not mirrored, so I'm looking at my face in ways that I'm unaccustomed to, and like that's very, very disconcerting.
Yeah.
And when I first went about recording that lecture or like that piece, I had a really hard time looking at myself talking. And it's just in terms of like how that also like conveys itself to the audience, even like through the work itself, like through the works like my voice appears or voices appear. It's how can those guide an experience that are not necessarily about looking, but listening. And how can you let your mind wander in different places while you're listening to something? Or how can the image that you're seeing be used to support or bolster the auditory sort of things that are coming in and out of your head, or in and out of your consciousness, or in and out of attention. And I mean, it's just, that's something that I think a lot about, especially what I'm asking of an audience. I want them to pay attention to when I hope to give them permission for their minds to wander, or for them to daydream a bit, because I think that's also part of just like the multi-sensorial approach that we have to, I don't know, internalizing, ingesting, processing all of these stimuli in ways that I want to, I don't know, play around with or try and draw attention to or away from, especially these things that are hard to describe.
And especially, I think, you know, there's a lot of really great discussions and theories around deep listening, and especially, you know, experiencing a piece as yours, it definitely can feel a little bit like an insider, not necessarily like insider in that you're, you know, excluding in an excluding kind of way, but more of like an insider outsider, that you're getting these moments revealed to you in either through the text or part of the word. Sometimes we don't get the full translation, and we just hear the sounds, and I really, really appreciate that. I've read an interview where you describe your work as, let me get this, an ethno-poetic. And I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that, and actually how your traditional language may, you know, I guess affect that, or reflect that, or just how it influences that. That's the word I'm looking for. Influences that.
Like the ethno-poetic was a way for me to, like, it's a phrase that I landed on, I think early on, in terms of like my experimental work, that really helped me describe what it was I was trying to do, especially around documentary work or experimental documentary work, or even like the history of ethnographic film and how it shapes my understanding of, I guess, like, you know, my communities, and how that's a fallacy, and how that's a filter through a Western lens that's I don't need. So the ethno-poetic was a way to look at those things, and it was a proposition by a scholar, Elliot Weinberger, about what happens after those who traditionally have had the cameras pointed at them pick up the cameras, and what do they want to look at? And so it became, what do I want to look at? I feel like I've not, I mean, I feel like that term has like served its purpose for me with works throughout like the mid 2010s. And as I move into more, I guess, like personal spaces, or just like questioning like these different instances around myth or mythology or myth making, it seems like a next step. It seems like something else beyond the ethno-poetic, because I mean, the thing that I am resistant to now, or just question a bit more, is just, why does the ethno have to be in front of, you know, the poetic?
Yeah.
How can the films that I'm making that are dealing with these things that are ethno-poetic or ethnographic not viewed through a Western colonial lens of ethnography and anthropology? So it just becomes a question of like, well, then what comes next? And what's the next step, or what's the next phase, or what's the next turn?
And just in terms of next step, I suppose, you know, you had a feature film last year, and you also had 2 installation works where you worked with photography. You had a 3-channel video as part of the show at Bard, I think. And I was just curious about how you approach materiality within your work, because, and often, you know, I really appreciate in your bio you use the word container, and I was just like, I don't know why, it was just like a bit of an aha for me. I was like, yeah, these are a bit containers, and you talk about the lens in which we view, and then you kind of sometimes will make other lenses within the lens as well, like whether it's like the projector screen or the photograph or something like that. And I was just wondering if you could talk about your materiality and your approach to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like broadly speaking, I mean, those ideas like puts the agency back into, and I guess like to the individual or to the practice. And like while film or moving image has been like my primary mode of making a work or expression, it was a return or I guess a return to writing and a return to photography, and you know, questioning like what multi-channel work looks like, that then opened up a lot more of my practice, I think. Or I mean, it's just trying to find ways not to overburden these works, whatever the material or whatever the media is, how to let them be what they can be or what they want to be. Like I don't want to put everything that I'm thinking about or processing into a single film, but how can a film exist alongside a series of photographs that touch on the same sort of subjects or the subject matters, and how can it approach this thing that I'm trying to get at in a different way or from a different angle, and how can the multi-channel work do that? Or even how can the presentation of works in a cinema space or a gallery space or a museum space offer different ways of understanding or relating to these pieces that, I don't know, you may lose some of the intimacy of a cinema and a gallery space, but then you have the opportunity to watch something over and over again or return to it a different day or a different hour, that then may inform a different way that you're experiencing or thinking about the content or what it is. So I mean, I think like, I mean, these different materials, these different medias like offer different ways of triangulating a thing, or a thing that I can't describe, and a feeling I can't put my finger on, and a way that I don't know how to approach, which is like what the work does and what it is for me. It's not trying to describe something, it's trying to search for something.
I just like, I guess just based off of that a little bit, I had a question around what would be an ideal space, or do you, like what, you know, if you could dream up a space of what your work could be presented in, you know, often we're either in like a cute, like we're regulated to the white cube or to the cinema. And what would an ideal space be like for
you? I think like a space that's, I don't know, there's some kind of labyrinth with like dark rooms and like sound bleed. I don't know, where like the films are all together, but also like separate, and like there's still spaces for the photographies and the text work. I had an opportunity at a space called the Poor Farm, which is in central Wisconsin, where I had a solo exhibition, and it's on my homelands and my Ho-Chunk homelands, and it was just, you know, a two-story building, and I had 9 or 10 videos installed in different rooms and photographs, and it was an old house. It was like, you know, 100 and some odd years old, and the sound bleed was just, I loved it. I know a lot of curators don't like sound bleed at all in terms of spaces, depending on the show or whatever. Yeah. But just in terms of the context of the solo exhibition of video works together, I really liked hearing different pieces from across a space, and I like that interaction and that overlap. And like when you were standing in front of something, you could still like hear what the thing was, because we had directional speakers. Yeah. But in the interstitial spaces, it's just kind of moving through like a nebula of these different pieces, I suppose.
That's amazing. That would have been a really lovely show to experience and to walk through. And I think, you know, I really do appreciate when you do get that chance to return to a work at your pace, or like go back and see everything, you know, there are these conversations that are happening and these traces that are happening within your practice that you can make these connections to. And I really, I was wondering if you could speak to the role of land, because the land is also a really big trace, often has a voice that's coming through you that's from a specific perspective. And I was wondering if you could speak to the use of land, or where you're at with that right now in terms of your work.
I mean, it's something that I have a really hard time describing or relating to. I think just because there's so many different conflicting ways of approaching it that I guess I've experienced like my life, whether it is like from my family, from my community, or from just like Western traditions of pastoral photography or poetry or paintings that, I mean, are conflicting, but also like formative in a lot of ways. Especially around those Western approaches to landscape art and like what is it doing and what is the purpose of it. And often it's like, you know, surveying conquest or the spoils of war, or you know, romanticizing the phases before Manifest Destiny really took off in like the late 1800s. And there's a lot of violence there. And I guess like, I mean, I don't know if I mentioned this in the video, but there was like a series of photographs that I did that really came together and really what helped me think about them was a poem that a friend of mine wrote. His name's Franklin K.R. Klein, and he's a Cherokee poet. And the last two lines of his poem were like, why write poems about the land that describes itself? And like that really struck a chord with me in terms of how I think about the land, or just how I'm trying to be in communion or communicate with these spaces, or listen or be receptive to what the land is trying to describe. And how then like does my language, do my experiences, do my relationship with who I am then become a filter for that language and for that description? And how can I then be in communion with it? And how can these works in the ways that I'm using video, or the way that I'm looking at history, or how I move into these different spaces, be a part of that conversation and be part of that communion?
Amazing. There's so many lovely poetry references that that you brought through the talk, especially through I'm forgetting the title of the last film that we had that you had presented. But I was wondering if you could speak to, I guess, maybe the poetry and the community that you have. It seems like there is quite this really deep connection to poetry, especially within Indigenous poets in the States, and you have quite a few writings also on your website that are, a real part of your practice and such. Could you speak to poetry within that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess of all the things that I was doing before I started making film, I think like writing was one of the things I've been doing for the longest. The other being music. And so, I don't know, I think like I've always like had this draw or pull towards poetry, or to writing, or to writers, and to music, and to like poetic musicians and songwriters. That, I don't know, like those are two things that like I never really like always wanted to do, but never thought that I was like that good at, or had a discipline to invest in that practice. I still don't have much of a writing practice. It just like kind of comes in spurts, but like that's okay because it's the way that I do it, and it's what works for me. But it just took me a long time to realize that it's okay. And so like finding the video work as a vessel for these writings, and for, I guess, like a more poetic approach to looking at these different topics, was a way to dip back more into like a basic poetic writing, and even like how to take the sensibilities that I was always drawn to with poetry, with more lyrical prose, into these videos themselves, and how to be expressive in that sort of way, or how opacity is a process that lends itself very well to poetry, in terms of not being didactic and not being expository about what the history is of my communities and my tribes and my peoples. Because like, I mean, it also comes from a very, very strong desire to not contextualize or give history lessons to white people.
Yeah.
It's just like, I mean, I don't want to anymore. And so poetry and our poetic expressions were always ways to do that, or to accomplish that for me, to try and just like, focus on like the things that I want to talk about, and not feel like, again, like not wanting the works to have to do everything that I'm thinking about. Like, I don't have to do everything that's going on in terms of like these conversations, and like, how can these works be part of a larger conversation going on with other Indigenous people in the US, in Canada, and the world, in places that have been affected by colonialism or are resistant to it, and where Indigenous people reside. And so these are broader conversations that I think it's important for me to try and recognize that I'm a very small part of. a poetic expression isn't a way out of that, or isn't a way of like trying to skew a certain sense of responsibility, but it is a way to be expressive of things that are ineffable and indescribable, and the things that maybe English doesn't quite do the best job of conveying or relating.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think, like, or just as a viewer, you know, there's definitely some prompts that you walk away with in terms of thinking further about the context, or thinking further about those conversations more on maybe whether it's a national or a global context, and especially being a minority, I suppose, if you will, in terms of the larger colonial history. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, you know, there's also this weight, or not weight, but it seems like there's this responsibility to relationship and to relations, if you will. You know, not only to yourself, then to your family. I feel like there's a relationship to carry with language, a relationship with family, and then also, again, that relationship with land, and then also just to the community when you made a work for someone. I just wanted to see if you could speak a little bit to that. I think this would probably be our last question. So.
I mean, this goes into, like, I guess, who I make films with and who I make films about. And it's always people that I know. Mm-hmm. It's always people that I'm close with, because it feels the safest. And it also feels a way that, you know, there's trust there built into these relationships, whether it's with my friends or with my family. I've never been much of an extractive sort of documentarian. I don't go to places, and I don't really interview people that I don't know. Mm-hmm. That's just me. And because, like, I mean, I don't know, I'm not outgoing, and not that much of a talker, but it just always felt comfortable for me to do that. And there was something about the safety of exploring these familial relationships, whether it's with my father or with my grandmother or with close friends that I've known for years, that's, I guess, allowed us to also just, like, get to the gist of it, to get to the point. Mm-hmm. That film Jaji Aprox about my father. I mean, it's just like there's a lot there, but it's just I don't go into the history of our relationship and the difficulties around it. Mm-hmm. It's something that I think, I don't know, from what people have shared with me, like a lot of Native people identify with in terms of having a dad that's power bum and just, like, on the road, you know, all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's like, and it's just how difficult it is. And, you know, but, like, the film reads differently for different people. And, like, my mom reads it in a way that's different than, I don't know, someone from other responses that I've heard. Mm-hmm. And it's just like that sort of subtext that can just be subtext, that can be a shared history and a shared knowledge that family knows, that friends know, that chosen family knows, that community knows, that really hopefully makes space to get to the things that are hard to talk about, the things that are hard to describe, and also trying to find ways to move beyond, I don't know, to just move, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And just like the specificity of audience, or just saying, like, this is for my tribe, this is for my community, this is for my clan, this is for a single person. It's just like that focus of audience, I think, can be very freeing, especially when the burden of representation is put so strongly on Indigenous people on this continent to be experts and to be interpreters and to be guides for white audiences. And being a guide is hard and it's exhausting, and being an interpreter is impossible. And I don't know, it's just like there's films out there that do that, there's works out there that do that. It doesn't have to be like that. And again, like, you know, family and community has always been a space of refuge, mm-hmm. and safety. And if anything, I think these works feel safe for me in ways that I don't often feel in the world outside of them.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's really, yeah, I think, you know, we definitely, as I've experienced that as well, just in terms of being put in positions, and especially, yeah, I feel like there's a humanity that's there that people can feel and people can relate to. And at the end of the day, when people are experiencing a work that's, you know, often that's a takeaway, and you feel that heart and you feel that spirit that's in there. And I really appreciate you coming to chat with me today, and also sharing this work with us. It's really, I feel like it shows such the nuances, but also just the wonderful breadth of the types of practices people are doing now, especially within your practice. I look forward to seeing more work and also more spaces that maybe you interrogate and make personal and give back again. And so thank you again. Thank you, FIFA, for having us today. And be sure to check out, if you're an Indigenous creator, check out imagineNATIVE's website. Our call for submissions is free and it's open. And we look forward to seeing your work. Thank you.
Thank you.